morning. I'm at the back end of a cold. I think I'm gradually losing my voice. I'm praying I can sustain to this afternoon. I'm fine, just I couldn't speak much. So this morning, I would like to convince you that we are entering a new stage of the digital economy, and let's call it data economy. Now, I understand that data has always been emphasized in the digital economy, but I would like to argue that its infrastructure, from technology to the policy and business practice, was not there. So this is much more the future that is happening right now. That's called a data economy. Now, and this is a joint report with many of the Luohan community members, including many of you are here. Patrick and Holmstrom is not here, but he will be later online. I'm Sergeant Mike Spence, Wei is here, and many of my colleagues within the Luohan Academy. So, as we know that we're making a lot of strides on the technology side, and yes, they will talk a lot about this. So we have much more with the digital connectivity, and that provides a lot more data. But now there's a lot more progress on the computing power and large models. And that is the other side of the AI improvement, which is using the data. On the practice side, we're seeing it impacting our life in every day. From smart logistics, we can have fresh food from harvested from morning, but delivered on your dinner table. We're seeing that now the consumers can select from billions of the items, which was impossible before. Now we can find the right match, which is great, not only for the consumers, but also for the suppliers, because small suppliers, before that, without a brand, it's impossible for them to reach so many consumers. We're also seeing the startups, and Mr. Peng is here. Xiaopeng, he's actually in charge in Alibaba's a lot of the data business, and they provide the service such that a lot of the startups are able to gather the data, a lot of data which was only available before to big companies. So it's really impacting us to the extent that we are now more and more policymakers and the macroeconomists start to talk about data as an production input in the macroeconomy. But of course, to really realize this, to realize the potential of data as a production input, we have to solve many of the key issues it brought about. For example, will the use of data infringe on user privacy? Is data circulation secure? Will data be misused, abused? Can the arrangement of data ownership and distribution mechanisms effectively stimulate data producers and consumers? So given that, if put together, we can see that actually much has happened worldwide in the past several days. So firstly, on the policy side, data policies are become much more balanced between privacy protection and data development. So more and more governments understand that we need to protect the privacy and the security. In the meantime, we have to develop the economy more and more using the data. So it's much more balanced. And on the business practice side, we see a couple of things. One is that it's much more and more integrated into the business mechanism. In what we can see, the Apple's introduction of the Apple tracking transparency. Google announced to include privacy sandbox in Android, in China, probably globally. Now, for example, in e-commerce, and in many of those platforms, now it'd be much harder to track address, telephone numbers. They are all encrypted. Okay, so that on the practice mechanism side, but on the technology side, it's I'm going to argue later. This is something called the privacy enhancement technology has improved dramatically. So on the policy side, on the management routine, business routine, and on the technology side, they are making big strides. So these trends indicate that the data economy, that is a new stage of the digital economy, with the data as an important factor driving economic activity, is coming. But it's not just about writing out this factor in our production function as macroeconomists normally do. We need to understand this data economy. We need to understand the essential features, the essence of data, which is very different from normal commodities. And we need to understand what is the nature of data if it's a factor of production? What are the fundamental principles of utilizing data in the economy? The relation between data policies, business practice, and technologies. The relation between privacy protection and the data flows. A list of questions, which is we attempted some efforts to clarify some of the things. And of course, this is big in subjects, and we're just hoping that more people will work with us on this subject. So let me first talk about the nature of data and the principle of using data in the economy. Now, in nature, we believe that data has three distinctive features. They are all different from normal commodities or production inputs. So firstly, we'll argue that it is not separable from economic activities. So data flow or information flow is just a natural part of the economic activities. So in this sense, then much of its value is realized through the economic activities. It's not separable. So to be more specific, nowadays, a lot of people taking data as a commodity, as if it has a separate value. You can price it and can separately buy and sell it. But it's so much more, it's just part of the economy. It's being produced all the time. And so in this sense, it's a dynamic part of the economic activity, and it's a flow. It's not separable from the economic activity in large. Second, that of course we will know is non-rival. Non-rival means that it's not oil. It can be burned many times. So on one hand, that as a unique production input, we would like to use it unlimited times. We should encourage data flow to fully leverage on its feature. But on the other hand, we shouldn't encourage sole ownership, because like I'm speaking here, everybody hearing it, that content is shared by everyone. It shouldn't be just belongs to me. But on the other hand, it's not just that everybody freely to have the data, because you have to have an incentive scheme for people to produce the data, record the data, process data, and share the data. So that combination is needed under the feature of the non-rivalry. And externally, of course, it has externalities, precisely because it has, because of its, it has externalities, partly because it has this non-rivalry feature, because somebody else can have the information or data about the data subjects that can be abused or used in a way that the data subject doesn't like. So we just listed some of the, if you compare with other production inputs, they're just very different. And this needs to be treated differently. So based on that, then we can see that what I talk about the nature of the data, and we also need to think about who are the stakeholders in this data economy. We actually have the data subjects. What is the data about? And also the data producers. Actually, data producers or the users, they are not necessarily the data subjects. For example, I'm speaking, of course, it's something about me. Everybody hearing this, you are using your ear and your eyes to produce the data. If you do not believe me, get out. You won't be able to hear me. You don't produce it, okay? And it's about me. I'm the data subject, but you are the producer using your organs. And that's so they are not exactly the same. And then we have to have the incentive scheme that can protect the potential externalities produced for the data subjects. In the meantime, we have to encourage the producers to produce it, to share it in a secured, trustworthy way. So we believe there are 4 essential features, principles for the data economy. We regard data as a production input. The first is the value principle. We believe that ultimately we want to release the value of data, to really release, to enjoy the data dividends. So the value principle. The second is incentive compatible. We got to have the right incentive scheme. It can encourage the data producers, protect the data subjects, and all the involved parties should have the incentives. Of course, it should be externality solving, because we just talked about data has important externalities, good or bad. And finally, the mechanism should be efficient. Okay, it should to allocate the responsibilities and the benefits in a incentive compatible way. Now, those are the 4 principles. We would argue that much of the progress happened in the past several years are consistent with such principles. For example, we look at the policy side. Now, we believe that policy has to solve the problems of the protection, which is solving the externality part, ownership and the incentive scheme arrangement, and finally, the flow mechanisms. So let me explain in detail. Now, firstly, if you look at some of the arrangement, China is an interesting example, and Professor Gauss here is actually one of he drafted the most important data act in China. It's called the 20 items of the data act. So if you look at some of the essential features, firstly, we classify the data. We would like to promote the data to flow, but they have different level of externalities. So we separate them. Okay, we use the public data, user data, and the private company data, and they're different, and we should govern them differently. Second, we separate. We do not emphasize property right. We emphasize the use right. Okay, so in this sense, the 20 data measures, it separates into the rights to hold the data resource, rights to process and use data, and the rights to operate business on data products. So that it gives the incentive schemes for different participants. And finally, it incentivizes the stakeholders. It says that essentially those who invest and contribute should benefit from it. Okay, so that is important. For example, as I said, if you hear it if you produce the data, you have the right. In the meantime, you have the responsibility to protect the externalities. So that's the essential structure, and we can see that. So that is on the policy side, and so we can see actually then on the practice side, we're seeing that another side of the technology is to reduce the technological barriers and to promote, for example, interoperability between the platforms to have the standards to make the data flow, and that in the United States, in the EU and China, they have corresponding acts. And also it's promoting the privacy enhancing technologies. So that's on the policy side. On the practice side, we're seeing a lot of progress, and we call this the PET, privacy enhancing technologies. So that essentially have two categories. You either let the data to be secured, let it flow freely, but it's encrypted such that the data can be trusted. Nobody can really infringe on it, such like the blockchain, such like the Bitcoin. Okay, the data itself is secure, or you have a secure environment. You only exchange the data within the trusted environment. So either makes the environment trustworthy or make the data that can be trusted to flow. These are two ways, and we do see that in practice, it's being used widely. For example, as I talk about on from Apple and other Android, now we have the notice and consent and anti-tracking practice is becoming more and more practical in all over the place globally, including in China. And we see the PET technology is very, so that's one side is from for the user's data, from the consent to the use and the right to, for example, to cancel this. So that on the consumers and the users side. But what's equally interesting is on the business data side. Now we're seeing increasingly sophisticated technology because it's trusted execution environments that can encourage the companies to exchange data within a trusted environment. And with this federated learning, with the secured multi-party computations, you can actually exchange data without taking away the original data. In this sense, then now we have the technology. Actually, the data it flows, but the original data doesn't flow. Okay, so what we are having this a very important progress on the business data exchange side. So let me conclude what I'm trying to say here. I believe that we are including, we in this report, we argue that the digital economy is stepped into a new stage. Let's call it a data economy. Data has been emphasized many times before, but before that, the technology side was not there, and the policy and practice infrastructure was not there either. So on the technology side, we can see that the recent important progress of the cloud computing and large language models, other models, it really, really will promote the use of the data much more. That's on technology progress. But on the policy side, this is the part I'm emphasizing here. Then we can see that it's very much better the infrastructure, policy infrastructure deal with data, from the data classification, from property right of how to use the data, from the value exchange of the data, and from also the privacy enhancing technologies. So that together, we believe the infrastructure from the policy side, from the business practice side, and from technology side are much more ready. We are seeing a new era. We believe there will be unprecedented data flow. So this is interesting. That is, it starts with much more privacy protection, but this protection will make us trust the data flow much more. And so we believe that it will enter in a stage with unprecedented data exchange, especially between the business. We believe that era is coming. Now, that actually has very important implications, we believe, for all the stakeholders. And for example, for the scholars, many of you here are outstanding scholars. I think we need to probably move away a bit from modeling just that data is the separate commodity, it belongs whom, and because practically in no country is emphasizing that. We need to understand a more sophisticated, efficient way of using the data. We need to understand the complex interactions among the stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, to incorporate that. It's also the role of technology in solving the problems into our models. So in that, we'll probably also need to think more how to model the data as production input. We're not seeing yet, or not far from satisfactory. And for firms, of course, it's a new era of challenge and opportunities. It becomes a new infrastructure. I think Xiaopeng will talk about how he's providing this kind of service tools, helping the firms. If you want to do business in this day, you need to have this infrastructure and capacities ready. And finally, for the governments, for different legislations across the world, how do they grasp such opportunities? Thank you.